is the second part of my example on how to make the May-June 25 number 11 exam for IGCSE Marine Science. The first 1 to 4 you can find in a different video. Again, this is made for my class. It is extremely non-profit, as you can see by the design, and anyone are more than welcome to use it. And any mistakes here are mine and mine alone, and does no way reflect on Cambridge. Okay, so here on the next part of the exam. In question 5, they show us a manatee eating seagrass, and then they get really Cambridge on us because they ask about the seagrass instead. And they ask that seagrass cells have cell walls. State one function of the cell wall. And if you remember, cell walls is the cellulose part outside the cell membrane that we find in plants but not in animals. So my answer would be something either these, that the cell wall helps protect the cell, or you can also talk about how the cell wall will give structure and how that helps the entire plant have its structure. The next question is a bit tricky as well. They ask about both plants and animals undertake gas exchange and respiration, and describe the difference between gas exchange and respiration. And here I had some students who immediately thought, all right, plants and animals, we have to look at the difference between photosynthesis and respiration. This here requires you to know the difference between gas exchange and respiration. And it's a 5-point question, so there's a lot on the line here. And I tried to write my answer here, and it might be overly complicated, as I'm a huge fan of respiratory physiology. But anyway, this is how I would write it. I would say that respiration is a chemical process all cells do. That's 1 point. It's a breakdown of mainly glucoses in the mitochondria in the cells to generate energy in the form of ATP. That's 1 more point. And the breakdown requires oxygen for aerobic respiration, and it releases CO2 and water. That's another point. Gas exchange is a physical process that occurs in the gills or the lungs of larger animals, or over the skin and cell membrane of small organisms, and here I could write plants and algae as well. And this facilitates the movement of oxygen into the organism and into the cells, and the movement of CO2 out of the cell and out of the organism. And here I could write also something about this being the opposite in plants, where you want CO2 into the plant and oxygen out. If you want another point, you could write that here. In larger organisms, it's done by a circulatory system. In small organisms, diffusion can be enough. Again, the last one here is not really needed. So here you might write something about plants instead. But again, it's a 5-point question, so you need to come up with 5 different things to make sure you get all 5 points. And now we finally get to the manatee we saw on the first page of the question. And they ask us to define the term herbivore. And herbivore is an animal that gets its energy by eating producers. You can also write plants, but again, in the marine environment, you'll also get a lot of macroalgae, so plants is not a good answer as producers. And they ask then why herbivores receive a greater proportion of the sun's energy through the food chain than carnivores. It's a 2-point question, so you have to come up with 2 things. So I'll say there is energy loss of 90% for each trophic level. That's one thing. So there's more energy at the lower trophic level. And then my explanation, as more energy is lost at each trophic level due to energy loss through respiration, heat loss, movement, excretory process, and feces. Here is a question that seems quite simple, but where you can easily lose a few points. They ask about microplastic, and they want you to explain why microplastic are found in the ocean. And when I talk to students about this question, they often say, well, plastic ends up in the river and then it ends up in the sea and gets broken down to microplastic. And while that is entirely correct, Cambridge here wants you to be more specific. So here is how I would answer it. I say plastic, such as water bottle and single-use plastic from fast food and other similar sources, end up in the rivers in countries which lack the proper way of disposal. I choose to be specific here, like with bottles and stuff like that, because they want a single source in the answer. And then from the river, it ends up in the sea. Plastic waste from ocean-going ships and lost plastic fishing nets ends up in the ocean. So now I have some named sources in the ocean. Wave action and UV light breaks down the plastic to smaller pieces, eventually ending up as microplastic in the benthic zone. So here I'm trying to be quite specific on what types of plastic, where it comes from, how it ends there, and how it gets broken down. This is what I want you to think about when answering questions like this. Our next question here, although it looks complex, is actually just a math question. And it requires you to be able to calculate a change in percentage. This is also why you should always bring a calculator to any of your Cambridge science exams. So we have here with the microplastic, we find here at our, here we can see this here is around 2.4. And here, without the microplastic, we get a growth rate of 3.6. Now, here you have to remember, if we want to find a change in percentage, it is the difference divided with the number we compare them with. So first we find the difference, which is 3.6 minus 2.4, which is 1.2. And then we take this difference here, the 1.2, and divide it with 3.6 and times it with 100 to get our percentage. And then we get a number of 33.3%. So again, practice some basic math here. Change in percentage is one of those you should absolutely know how to do for marine science. As we saw, the growth rate was lower for group M compared to group N. Now they ask us 3 reasons for 3 points for the difference in growth rate. Here's important to remember, these are cold water corals, so don't say anything about the plastic blocking photosynthesis. I saw quite a few students doing that, and this is for the next question. So here are my answers, what I would give. And again, maybe I'm giving a little bit too much, but I just show some ways you can get the points. I will say the polyps in the group M ingest a microplastic, and microplastic contains no nutrients, energy, so they get less energy for growth. It's the same argument you can use for pretty much any other marine animal who might eat plastic. I can also say that a microplastic in group M fill the stomach and stop feeding, leading to less energy for growth. Again, this argument could be used for sea turtles, for example, as well. Microplastic blocks the digestive system of the polyps in group M, so they cannot feed as well as without the plastic. Microplastic might release toxins, which could reduce growth rate, or microplastic might cause physical damage to the corals, thereby reducing growth rate. So these are just some of the ways you might be able to get those 3 points. But important, don't talk about photosynthesis, talk about lack of nutrients, talk about damage, and talk about toxins. So now we get to talk about photosynthesis and the zooxanthellae, because the scientists now repeat the investigation with coral polyps that do contain our symbiotic algae. Now explain how the results of this investigation will be different from the investigation with the cold water polyps. And here we have to talk about sunlight and the algae. So my answer would look something like this. Compared to the cold water corals, I would expect higher growth rate because zooxanthellae photosynthesis to provide nutrients to the corals. I would also expect less difference between the polyps with and without microplastic, as they will both gain nutrition from the symbiotic zooxanthellae. So this is how I would get my 2 points here, talking about photosynthesis. Finally, we have to suggest how one named strategy can reduce the impact of plastic on marine ecosystems. So not only do you have to name it, you also have to suggest how that strategy could reduce plastic. So each pair will give you 2 points. I come up with 3 different versions. Illustration. It's one, so we can ban single-use non-biodegradable plastic and fishing gear. We can replace single-use plastic with biodegradable materials or materials that can be reused. And education, we can educate people on the problem of single-use plastic to encourage them to reduce the use of single-use plastic and recycle more, so less plastic goes to landfills. So legislation, replacing, and education, and then for each of them explain how. So we go back to chapter 6 about human impacts in tourism, and we ask to describe how ecotourism differs from normal tourism. And we need to have two different things for 2 points, but I'll come up with a few more. So I'll say ecosystem is sustainable. Ecosystem encourage environmental and cultural understanding and includes local participation or local income. Ecotourism encourage participation in and contribution to conservation of species and ecosystem. And ecotourism has a lower carbon footprint. Remember, you only need 2 of these to get the 2 points. So here you can see our figure that shows our marine national park, and we are told our marine national park has the following rules. No more than 70 people is allowed on the beach at any time, and mobile phones must be switched off when on the beach, and no water sports are allowed within the national park. And then they ask us to suggest different ecological reasons for each rule. So fewer people, that we have less impact. And it's easier to control. With no mobile phones, we have no light and sound pollution. And with no water sport, there is less risk of injury to the turtles. So they ask us to suggest how the conservation area benefits from being located within a marine national park. And we have to give 2 different reasons, as it's 2 points, but give me a few more. No or only a few fishing boats. This allows a higher number for marine life the turtles eat, so more food for the turtles. Less fishing activity prevents turtle becoming bycatch. There is an ecological benefit of protected habitats for future generations, so you'll keep having this for many generations. There is economic benefit of jobs for conservationists and guides. And a good protected area is already being monitored by scientists and maybe the government, so you have things under control. We continue in chapter 6. They ask us to suggest a sustainable method for tourists to reach a national park from the nearest town and give a reason for your suggestion. And my suggestion here would I'll use electric vehicles, bicycles or walking, as this will reduce air pollution, noise pollution and carbon dioxide emissions. So here we get a classical issue. A business wants to build a tourist hotel next to the conservation area boundary. Describe one possible conflict between the hotel and the ecotourism attraction. So here we should both describe the conflict and how it could damage the ecosystem or our turtles. So again, I've given more than 2. I would say that visitors would like to undertake water-based activities, which could disturb nesting turtles or turtles near the beach. And with a hotel, there's a potential for noise and light pollution on the beach. That could disturb the turtles laying their eggs. There might be an increased use of motorized transport on the beach. That can cause pollution and can damage buried eggs. A hotel may be built on the nesting area, thereby reducing the size of the nesting area and thereby the population of turtles. Or the building process itself could damage the local area, and building materials might be taken from the marine environment. So here we get one of the big 6-point questions. Discuss the importance of plankton to the marine ecosystem. And here I had some students write phytoplankton absorb sunlight, so they are important. And that's correct. But since we need 6 points, we need to come up with at least 6 different parts. So I will write something like this, that plankton are general microscopic, so they are high abundance. And phytoplankton are producers that live in large numbers in surface water. Chloroplast inside the plankton traps light, and photosynthesis thereby make energy available for the food web, as photosynthesis convert light energy to chemical energy. And photosynthesis, especially in phytoplankton, absorbs carbon dioxide and releases oxygen. Producers, such as plankton, absorb minerals and nutrients, such as nitrogen, into the food chain, all the proteins we need further up the food chain. Now, plankton can be both phytoplankton and zooplankton. Zooplankton, such as larvae of fish and invertebrates, and zooplankton are a very numerous primary consumer that is important as food further up the food chain, for example, the krill we see in the Arctic Ocean. And plankton thereby gives any nutrient to all the next trophic levels in the marine ecosystem. Now that should hopefully cover all 6 points. And our last question goes into section 3.2 in the book, reproduction. As I say, some plankton, quite a few actually, reproduce asexually. Describe asexual reproduction. 2 points. So I will write that asexual reproduction make the exact replicas or clones of the parent organisms. There's only one organism involved, so there's no need to find a partner and mix the DNA. And since it's asexual, there are no sex cell or gametes involved, so it might happen by fission, budding, or fragmentation.